Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are doing something a little different.
Mm.
Usually we take a concept or a book or a trend and we just drill down. But today, we're looking at a biography, or maybe more accurately, a biography of a crisis.
And a crisis that really, you could argue, completely fractured the medical world of the 19th century.
Right.
And it still causes these huge debates today.
It really does. And for our sources, we're stacking a few heavy hitters.
We are.
We've got Richard Haehl's Samuel Hahnemann, his life and work, which is, it's essentially the Bible for this topic, a huge 2-volume set.
It's massive.
And we're balancing that against Thomas Lindsley Bradford's The Life and Letters of Dr. Samuel Hahnemann. And then we have a whole stack of documentary notes on 18th century medical practice, just to give us some context.
Which you really, really need for this story.
Yeah.
And our mission today is pretty specific. We want to understand the man before we get to the controversy.
Right, because when you hear the name Samuel Hahnemann, your mind just jumps straight to the end of the story, doesn't it?
It does. You think homeopathy, the little white pills, the arguments.
All the skepticism, or on the other side, all the devotion. But we're going all the way back.
To the beginning.
We are going to Saxony in the late 1700s to see how a little clay lamp in a town called Meissen started a revolution.
But before we get to the lamp, I think we have to start in the dark.
The dark, yes. Okay, let's set the scene.
Mm-hmm.
It's the late 1780s. I want you to imagine a dimly lit study. It smells like old parchment and maybe stale ink. And you have a young man, a doctor, Samuel Hahnemann.
And he's desperate. He's holding a quill, staring at this letter he's writing.
And this is not just some, casual update to a colleague.
No, this letter is effectively him ending his career.
It is so heavy. I want to read a specific part because this is really the hook for the whole story. He writes, and just listen to the emotion here.
Yeah.
It was painful for me to grope in the dark, guided only by our books in the treatment of the sick, to prescribe substances that only owed to mere opinion their place in the materia medica.
And then he just drops the hammer.
He really does. He writes, I had conscientious scruples. To become in this way a murderer or an aggravator of the sufferings of mankind was to me a fearful thought.
A murderer.
That is such a startling word for a doctor to use about himself.
It tells you everything, though. Everything about his mental state. He goes on to say, so fearful and distressing was it that shortly after my marriage I abandoned the practice and scarcely treated anyone for fear of doing him harm.
So the question we have to answer today is, why?
Mm-hmm.
Why would a man who spent his entire youth fighting unimaginable poverty just to become a doctor
Everything he ever wanted.
suddenly quit medicine to avoid becoming a murderer?
To understand that, you have to understand this is the story of a man who literally chose poverty over what he saw as authorized manslaughter.
Wow.
But to get why that choice was so hard and so significant, we have to go back to the very beginning, to 1755.
Okay, let's go to Meissen in Saxony. Now, when I hear Meissen, I think of plates, like really expensive plates.
Porcelain, exactly. Meissen was world famous for it. A factory town, but a very high-end one. And Samuel Hahnemann is born there in April 1755.
And he's not born into the aristocracy. He's not, born with a silver spoon or, I guess, a porcelain spoon in his mouth.
Oh, far from it. His father, Christian Gottfried Hahnemann, was a painter at the porcelain factory.
Okay.
It was a working-class environment, but, skilled labor. And Samuel was, by all accounts, a precocious child.
Which is always that polite historian way of saying he was way smarter than anyone expected him to be for his background.
Exactly.
But the father figure here is really interesting to me because usually in these 18th century stories, the working class dad just wants the son to get a job, help feed the family. But Hahnemann's father was different.
Oh, the father is absolutely crucial. Even though he was a humble painter, he had this very specific philosophy that he just drilled into his son. He wasn't just, painting flowers on plates. He was a thinking man.
There's this one maxim that shows up everywhere, in Haehl and the other sources. It feels like the cornerstone of Hahnemann's entire life. What was it?
Prove all things, hold fast to what is good.
Prove all things.
Sounds like a nice little needlepoint slogan, right? Something you'd hang on the wall.
Yeah.
But for Hahnemann, this became his entire scientific method. His father was basically teaching him Do not accept authority just because it's authority.
Don't believe something just because a teacher or a priest or a book tells you to.
Test it. Prove it.
Which is honestly a pretty dangerous thing to teach a kid in the 1700s. I mean, that's the era of dogma.
It is, and it caused some friction. The family was poor. There wasn't money for endless schooling. In fact, his father took him out of school several times because he couldn't afford the fees, and he just needed Samuel to work.
But Samuel, he just had this hunger to learn.
He did, and there's this one story, the story of the clay lamp, that I think just perfectly illustrates the kind of kid he was. Haehl recounts it with such reverence.
Oh, this is such a great detail. So, young Samuel is obsessed with studying, but the family is poor. Candles cost money, oil costs money.
And his father, being a practical man, just wants him to go to sleep so he can be healthy for work the next day.
Right. So his father forbids him from studying late, says, lights out.
So what does he do?
He makes his own lamp.
He fashions a homemade lamp out of clay. He physically molds it himself.
I just picture him taking this lump of clay, shaping it into a little vessel, finding some oil or fat, making a wick, and hiding it.
Exactly. He'd wall himself off in a corner of the room, maybe put up a little barrier so the light wouldn't wake his father, and just study in secret after midnight.
It creates this incredible image of a boy literally building his own light in the darkness.
And that's a metaphor that holds up for his entire life. He was willing to lose sleep, to build his own tools, just to get the knowledge. It speaks to what the sources call his indomitable perseverance.
So we have this brilliant boy in a porcelain town, taught to question everything, studying by the light of a lamp he made with his own hand.
And he eventually gets back into a proper school, the Prince's School of St. Afra, because the teachers realized he was too brilliant to lose. They actually waived his tuition.
That's how promising he was. The rector, a man named Muller, apparently advocated for him. They saw a genius in the making.
But genius doesn't pay the bills. And this brings us to the big logistical question.
Right. How does a poor painter's son afford medical school in the 1700s? It's not like they had student loans back then.
The short answer is he barely does.
Okay, so let's fast forward to 1775. He leaves Meissen for Leipzig to study medicine. And according to Bradford, one of our key sources, he arrives with, well, not much.
20 fellers.
20 failures. Now, I have no idea what the 1775 exchange rate is, but I'm guessing that's basically instant ramen levels of broke.
This is the last money you'll ever see from your parents, broke. His father gave him that and basically said, go, live honestly, but you're on your own now. I have other children to feed.
So how does he survive? He can't just call home for cash. He's in a university city, surrounded by wealthy students who are probably partying, wearing nice clothes.
He hustles. That's the only word for it. He skipped all the fun parts of university life.
No drinking, no social clubs.
None of it. He supported himself by teaching French and German to rich Greek students, and crucially, by translating books.
Okay, so that's going to be a theme, isn't it?
A huge thing. And we should pause on this because it's not just a side job. He wasn't just learning medicine. He was translating medical texts from other languages, English, French, Italian, into German to pay for his own education.
That's a really interesting point, because if you're just a student, you listen to your professor, you take notes, you regurgitate it on the exam.
Right.
But if you're translating 5 different authors from 3 different countries...
You start to see where they disagree. You see the cracks in the foundation. If the English doctor says, treat a fever with cold water, and the French doctor says, no, use hot blankets, and the German professor says, just bleed them until they faint.
They can't all be right.
Exactly. So his poverty, in a strange way, gave him a much better, more critical education than the rich kids were getting.
So he's in Leipzig for 2 years, but Leipzig is missing something, isn't it?
It's missing a great hospital for clinical experience. It was great for theory, for book learning, but Hahnemann needed to see patients. He needed to see actual bodies. So in 1777, he moves to Vienna.
Vienna, okay, now we're in the big leagues.
Oh, absolutely. The medical center of the world at that time, huge hospitals, famous doctors, the court of the empress. And here, he finds a mentor.
Dr. von Quarren.
Joseph von Quarren, physician to the Empress Maria Theresa, a massive figure. And for whatever reason, he takes a real shine to this poor, intense student from Saxony.
It's so interesting because later in life, Hahnemann didn't seem to respect many doctors at all. He calls most of them fools or worse. But he always seemed to respect Quarren.
He really did. Quarren was practically the only one. He took Hahnemann on his rounds, treated him almost like a private student. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. Haehl suggests Quarren saw the same thing that teachers back in Meissen saw, this incredibly intense, rigorous intellect.
So he's finally getting the hands-on clinical training he needs. He's poor, but he's making it work. But there's always a but in this story, isn't there?
The money ran out.
And it wasn't just that he spent it. The sources mentioned something shady happened.
Yeah, Bradford mentions he was the victim of some roguery or other.
Roguery. That is such a great 19th century word.
It is, isn't it? It's a polite way of saying he probably got robbed or swindled.
We don't know the details. Maybe a roommate stole his savings or he got tricked in a deal.
Whatever it was, the result was catastrophic. His meager savings, all the money he'd scraped together translating in Leipzig was just gone.
He'd only been in Vienna for 9 months. That's just heartbreaking. He's in the best place for his career, with the best mentor, and he is literally penniless. Can't pay fees, can't eat.
This is such a crucial pivot point. If he gives up here, he goes back to Meissen to paint porcelain. And medical history changes forever.
But he doesn't go back. He gets a lifeline.
A very strange and very fortunate lifeline. Enter Baron Samuel von Brukenthal.
The governor of Transylvania?
The very same. The richest man in that part of the Austrian Empire. The Baron was in Vienna. He met Hahnemann, probably introduced by Quarren, who was trying to save his favorite student, and he made him an offer.
Which was?
Come to Hermannstadt, which is now Sibiu in Romania, and be my family physician.
And his librarian.
And his librarian.
Yeah.
And that second part of the job description is arguably much more important than the first.
Okay, let's talk about that. The librarian of Transylvania. That sounds like a fantasy novel.
It really does. But picture the scene. It's 1777. Hahnemann travels east, deep into Transylvania. This is wild country compared to Vienna. And he's now totally isolated from the German medical establishment.
And he's in a massive library in a remote part of Eastern Europe. Just him and the books.
Thousands of them. The Baron was a serious collector, and Hahnemann's job was to catalog them all.
What does that do to a person's brain? I mean, cataloging isn't just stacking shelves. It's not manual labor.
No, it's organizing knowledge. This is his incubation period. Haehl's biography really emphasizes this. Because he was so isolated, he wasn't being indoctrinated by professors every day. He was just reading. And he wasn't just reading medicine.
What else was he reading?
Everything. Alchemy, history, botany, chemistry. He masters languages here. Italian, Greek, Latin, Arabic, maybe even some Hebrew.
So he's basically giving himself a self-directed PhD in the sum of all human knowledge.
That's a good way to put it. And because he had to catalog the library, he started to see the connections between fields that a normal medical student would never see.
Oh, right. Like how chemistry relates to botany and how botany relates to pharmacy.
Exactly. He was building this mental database. But I want to stress the system part. To catalog a library, you need a system. You need categories. You need order.
And medicine in the 1700s was not orderly.
It was pure chaos. It was a complete mess of conflicting theories. So you have this young man whose brain is being rewired for order and logic, and he's looking at a profession that is total chaos. The tension is just building.
Wait, he couldn't stay in the library forever?
No. After nearly 2 years, the sources say he got homesick.
He called it the longing of a Swiss for his rugged Alps. He missed Germany.
So he returns in 1779. He goes to Erlangen University.
Why Erlangen? Why not go back to Leipzig or Vienna?
It was cheaper.
Yeah.
And they were willing to accept his previous studies and let him graduate quickly. He'd just done with being a student. He wanted to work.
And he finally gets the piece of paper. He earns his MD.
August 1779. He defends his thesis.
And the topic was?
A consideration of the causes and treatment of cramps and spasms.
A very practical topic.
Very.
Yeah.
It shows he wasn't up in the clouds yet. He was focused on physical bodies and physical pain. So now he is officially Dr. Samuel Hahnemann.
Okay, mini summary time. Let's look at the scoreboard. Poor kid from a porcelain town, nearly starves in Leipzig, gets robbed in Vienna, is saved by a baron, reads every book in Transylvania, and now, at 24 years old, he has the degree.
He's got the degree, he's got the brain, he's got the languages. But this raises the biggest question of all.
Is he ready for the reality of 18th century medicine?
Or maybe, is the world of 18th century medicine ready for him?
Well, looking at what medicine was back then, I'd say he was walking straight into a nightmare.
It really was.
Let's unpack that, because we need to set the scene now. When we say going to the doctor in 1780, what does that actually look like? We take so much for granted today.
We really do. The dominant system at the time was called heroic medicine.
Heroic. That sounds good. Like, you know, the Avengers are coming to save you.
It sounds good, but the hero was the doctor, and the villain was the disease. The patient was just the battlefield they fought on.
Okay.
The idea was that the disease was this powerful force, so the doctor had to use an even more powerful, more violent force to drive it out. They had to shock the system back into health.
Shock it how?
Well, bloodletting was number one. The lancet, the leech. The theory was based on the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. If you were thick, your humors were out of balance. And usually they thought you had too much blood or inflamed blood.
So they just drained it.
Oh, yeah. And we are not talking about a few drops for a test. We're talking pints. They would cut a vein in your arm or your foot or even your neck.
Until the patient fainted.
Often, yes. Fainting was seen as a good sign. It meant the tension in the body was gone. They would bleed pregnant women, children, people already dying of weakness. It was systematic.
That's horrifying. What else?
And then you had purging.
Purging.
Yep, they give you powerful emetics drugs that make you vomit violently,
Right.
or drastic laxatives to clear your bowels. The idea was to clean out the body from every direction.
So you're already sick, you're weak, you have a fever, and the doctor comes in, bleeds you until you're dizzy, and then makes you throw up until you can't stand.
Exactly. It was a full-on assault on the body. And then there was the medication. This is where Hahnemann really starts to lose his mind. The concept was called polypharmacy.
Many pharmacies.
Many drugs in one prescription. A single mixture might have 50 or 60 ingredients.
50 in one pill or liquid.
In one mixture, yeah. Often called a theriac.
What on earth was in it?
What wasn't? Viper's flesh, dried frogs, opium, mercury, arsenic, dozens of herbs, crushed pearls, all just mashed together.
How could you possibly know what was working?
You couldn't. That's the entire point. That is what drove Hahnemann insane. If the patient got better, you had no idea which of the 50 ingredients did it. Was it the opium? Was it the viper flesh? Was it just dumb luck?
And if they got worse or died?
You had no idea which ingredient killed them or if the disease did. It was all just a guessing game, a dangerous, lethal guessing game. The treatment was often far more deadly than the disease.
Okay. So into this world walks Dr. Samuel Hahnemann, fresh from the library where everything is organized and logical. He's got his degree. He's ready to heal.
And he begins what are called his wandering years. He just can't seem to settle down.
He moves around a lot. Hedstedt, Dessau, Gommern.
He's trying to establish a practice, trying to be a normal doctor. And in Dessau, he does find something good. He meets his wife, Henriette Kussler.
So he's starting a family now. That adds pressure. You need a steady income to feed kids.
Huge pressure. But the medical reality is just grinding him down. He eventually lands in a town called Gommern in 1783 as the district physician.
And there's a detail about Gommern that I read in the source material that just made me laugh.
What's that?
It says, no physician had ever been there before, and inhabitants had no desire for one.
Ha ha. Talk about a tough crowd.
But maybe they were onto something. You know, if the doctor is just going to bleed you dry, maybe you're actually better off without one.
And that is exactly what Hahnemann himself started to realize. This is the turning point, the crisis of conscience.
We have his letters, his early writings from around 1784. He's treating patients, and he's just horrified by what he's doing.
He's realizing he's doing more harm than good. He looked at those mixtures with 50 ingredients and just thought, I have no idea what this is doing. He wrote about the agony of walking into a sick room, looking at a dying father or a sick child, and realizing that his tools, the lancet, the poisons, might actually kill them faster.
He felt like a fraud.
He felt worse than a fraud. He felt like a dangerous fraud. He admitted later, and this is a direct quote, that his patients would have done better had I let them alone.
That is a stunning admission for a doctor to make. They would have been better off without me.
It shows his integrity. Most doctors would just keep collecting their fees. The system was authorized, is what everyone did. No one would blame him if a patient died. That was just God's will or the illness. But Hahnemann took it personally.
So he makes a decision that I still find completely wild.
He quits.
He walks away. He has a wife. He has a growing family. He spent his youth starving to get this degree.
All that hustling in Leipzig, the cataloging in Transylvania.
And he just hangs it all up.
He prioritized his ethics over his family's survival. He basically said, I will not bleed people. I will not poison people. And if that means I can't be a doctor, then I won't be a doctor.
So what does a retired doctor do to survive in the 1780s? It's not like he can go drive for Uber.
He goes back to his old hustle, his superpower, translation and chemistry.
This brings us to the next phase, the chemist in exile. He moves to Dresden.
Dresden was a good move. It gave him access to better libraries, the scientific community, and he starts translating medical texts again, English to German, French to German.
There is such a deep, painful irony here.
Oh, massive irony.
He is a doctor who refuses to treat patients because he doesn't believe in the medicine. But he's making a living by translating books about that exact same medicine so other doctors can go out and use it.
It must have been torture for him, translating these cures that he was convinced were just nonsense or poison. But he had to feed his kids, and he did it at an incredible pace. He was a translation machine.
But he wasn't just a translator. The sources really emphasize he was a serious scientist in his own right. He wasn't just sitting around complaining.
No, not at all. He was a top-tier chemist. This part of his life often gets overlooked. He wrote a groundbreaking work on arsenic poisoning during this time.
Arsenic.
Yeah, arsenic was a huge problem. It was used in industry, it was used in medicine, and it was used by murderers because it was so hard to detect. And Hahnemann figured out a reliable chemical way to detect arsenic in the body and in fluids.
So he basically invented a forensic test.
Essentially, yes. What became known as the Hahnemann wine test became a standard procedure. It saved lives. It put murderers in jail.
And there's that great quote about this from a famous chemist.
Jöns Berzelius,
Yeah.
a giant in the field of chemistry. He later said, "This man would have been a great chemist had he not turned a great quack."
Ouch. Great quack.
It's such a backhanded compliment, but it proves a vital point. Even his greatest critics, like Berzelius, had to acknowledge that Hahnemann would have been a great chemist. They respected his scientific mind, even if they hated his later medical theories.
So this proves he wasn't some kind of mystic just waving crystals around. He understood toxicology. He understood chemical reactions.
Better than almost any doctor of his time. He knew exactly how dangerous those heroic medicines were because he understood the chemistry of the poisons they were using. He knew mercury wasn't just a cleaner, it was a neurotoxin.
So let's get the situation straight. It's now 1790. Hahnemann is in Dresden. He's in exile from his own profession. He's translating books to survive. He is the reluctant healer.
He's a man with a mission, but no tools. He's waiting for a spark, and he finds it in a footnote.
Okay, section 7, the spark. This is the moment everything changes.
The setup is simple. He is translating a book, a Materia Medica, by a man named William Cullen. Cullen was a huge deal, a very respected Scottish physician.
And Hahnemann's just translating it from English to German. He's working his way through, and he gets to the section on cinchona bark,
Peruvian bark. We know it today as the source of quinine.
which is used to treat malaria.
Or intermittent fever, as they called it back then.
Okay, so Cullen writes that cinchona bark cures malaria. No dispute there, it works. But then Cullen tries to explain why it works.
And this is the trigger. Cullen claims it works because it is bitter and astringent. He says it strengthens the stomach, and that renewed strength just pushes out the fever.
And Hahnemann just stops translating.
Be prove all things kid wakes up.
He looks at that sentence on the page and thinks, wait a minute, that makes absolutely no sense.
Exactly. His brain just goes, hang on. I know plenty of substances that are way more bitter and astringent than this. Strong coffee is bitter. Oak bark is astringent. They don't cure malaria.
If bitterness was the cure, we'd have a lot of cures for malaria.
Right, so Cullen's explanation just didn't hold water for Hahnemann's logical chemical mind. He rejected the authority. He said, Cullen is wrong.
So he decides to do something, well, something completely unheard of. He decides to investigate.
But he's not going to test it on a rat. He's not going to test it on a sick patient because that introduces too many variables.
If you give it to a sick person, you don't know if their symptoms change because of the drug or because the disease is just running its course.
So who does he test it on?
Himself.
He decides to take the medicine while he is perfectly healthy.
This is the moment. He gets some cinchona bark. He's a healthy man sitting at his desk, and he swallows a strong dose of it.
Why? What was he expecting to happen?
He wanted to see what the drug actually did to a healthy body, stripped of any disease. He wanted the raw data. He wanted to prove the drug's true effect.
This is the moment where the scientist and the doctor finally merge. He uses his own body as the laboratory.
Which is incredibly risky. He's basically poisoning himself, hoping for an insight.
He had to know.
So what happens?
Well, he takes the bark, and a short time later, his fingertips get cold. His heart starts pounding. He starts to shiver.
He gets a fever.
He gets a whole cascade of symptoms that look exactly like malaria.
Wait, the drug that cures malaria gave a healthy man the symptoms of malaria.
That was the observation. A perfect, temporary, artificial version of the disease. And when he stopped taking the bark, the symptoms went away. When he took it again, they came right back.
That is so counterintuitive.
It was revolutionary. It completely contradicted everything Cullen said. It wasn't curing malaria because it was bitter. It was curing malaria because it was capable of producing a similar state in a healthy person.
And that one observation, that a cure seems to mimic the disease, that's the seed.
That is the seed of the entire law of similars. Similibus currenter, like cures like.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves.
We are. That is the story for our next deep dive.
Okay, let's pull back and just look at the journey we've covered today, because it's incredible.
We traced him from that little clay lamp in Meissen, the boy who just wanted to learn, fighting against his own father's pragmatism.
We followed him through the absolute poverty of his student years, surviving on 20 thalers, bread, and just sheer will.
To the library in Transylvania, where he built his entire intellectual foundation in total isolation, organizing the chaos of the world onto shelves.
And then to that crisis of conscience, the doctor who quit because he refused to be a murderer, choosing poverty over what he saw as bad medicine.
And finally, to the chemist in exile, sitting at a desk in 1790, staring at a translation that he just knows is wrong.
You know, it really reframes the whole modern debate for me. Whether you agree with his final theories or not, you have to respect the integrity of the man who started it all. He broke his life apart because he just wouldn't accept good enough medicine.
He demanded proof, he demanded safety, and when the world couldn't give it to him, he decided he had to try and build it himself.
So here's the final thought for you to take away. Hahnemann is at his desk. He's just swallowed the bark. He's about to get sick. But that sickness is, ironically, going to cure his professional crisis.
It's the moment he stops being a translator of other people's ideas and finally becomes the author of his own.
So what happens when that fever hits? How does a shivering fit in a study lead to a global medical movement? And how does the medical establishment react when one man tells them they've been doing it wrong for centuries?
Spoiler alert, they do not take it well.
I can imagine.
They really, really do not take it well.
Join us for the eureka moment and the battle that follows in our next deep dive. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.